Hey everyone, welcome back to our live on self-love. Today we're going to be talking about part 3, which is boundaries. Let me come on here and invite my guest speaker, Karuna. And let's see, invite. Here we go. Everyone doing today? Drop it in the comments. Bonjour from France. Nice to have everyone here. So today we're going to be speaking specifically about self-love and going a little deeper into boundaries, which is a huge part of it. Let's see if it worked. Here we go.
Sorry, took me a little
No
time
worries.
space. We are
No
together
worries.
today on the same space.
So today is a really special day for me because I just realized today has been 1 year since getting certified as a life coach. I actually just had a session with Karuna earlier today, so she's actually over where I am, as you can see in her background, which is really exciting. But yeah, hi Karuna, how are you doing?
Doing really good. I'm so excited to be here today with you in person.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about all about boundaries and what that entails. And I think if you were to give a quick summary, Karuna, of what we discussed for the last 2 sessions, how would you summarize that?
So I think we started the first session on December 1st where we talked about self-love, and that self-love is all about loving ourselves unconditionally. And that is the foundation for us to have a fulfilling, happy life. Is if we are full with love, then the energy of love is so strong that everything in the world looks good. Just like falling in love for the first time, everything in the world is good when you're in love for the first time. And then I think the second session, and we shared some techniques, which we do in every session. And the second session was all about self-acceptance as being an important aspect of self-love, because you need to love every aspect of you. And for that, you need to be aware of your various aspects, your strengths, your weaknesses, your life stories, your life experiences, and see how you can learn from everything. So become aware and start accepting them as who you are. And then we shared a technique of how you can increase your self-acceptance too, of becoming more aware. And today we're going to talk about boundaries, which is another important aspect of loving yourself. When you empower yourself by loving yourself more and more, then you are able to set healthy boundaries with others. Right, so we're going to just talk a little bit about boundaries, and we'll share some of our experiences. And the sessions are mostly intuitive, everybody. We are not really planning things out except the topic, and then we just play it by the ear. And we appreciate all the comments and feedback we have received so far. And I know some of you have written it publicly, and some of you have sent me private messages. So please keep doing that, because it really helps to understand your life experience too and what you've been through. And we can all learn to guide each other, because even though both of us are life coaches, we are always learning. We are students of life. And each and every one of you have had different experiences. And even some of you who have common experiences, your perception about that experience may be different. How you handle the situation may be different. So there is so much to learn from everybody. So feel free to write to us and make it more of an interactive session. Right?
Yeah, I agree. And anyone who's watching now on the live, welcome. And anyone who's going to be watching the replay, feel free to share your biggest insights, your biggest takeaways. And as always, any questions that you have, we'll either address it, as they come in or in the next sessions. So this time I'll kick it off with boundaries, and they have a lot of different pieces to it, right? And I think the biggest component in understanding boundaries is knowing, and I know we talk about energy levels a lot, but I think your energy is super important to understand in certain moments of how you're feeling and if you're ready to tackle a certain situation. So I think a good example is, when you're having some kind of incident with someone, being able to really establish if you're in a good headspace and in a good energy to deal with it at the time and you're ready to conquer kind of that situation, or if it's better to set some kind of boundary where you almost distance yourself and you pull yourself back so that you give yourself more time and space to really think about what it is you actually do want to tackle. Because as we know, sometimes we go from defensive to defensive, and at the end of the day, you're not really, getting anything out of that situation.
That's true. I think I just wanted to bring one more point up before we went deeper into this. It's just because we're going to post this also on YouTube. So letting know that people can reach you at uh, lifeisbeautiful.me at Instagram. And my center is Karuna Healing Center. Julie is a life coach, and I'm a life coach, hypnotherapist, energy healer, past life regression therapist. So just a little background of us.
Yeah,
And
you're right. I was too excited. Jumped right into the topic.
we got in a little late today, so sorry about that, everybody. But yes, this is just a series we're doing on self-love, and every series is complete by every life chat is complete by itself. But if you go through all of them together, then you'll gain much more because we are kind of talking about the same thing in different aspects of it. So first, let's start with what is boundaries, right? What you said was totally right. But little bit, boundaries are basically some rules or some guidelines that you set in your life, which helps you to have better relationships, telling the world what is it that you're comfortable with, what is it that you are accepting, and what is it that you won't accept, right? So having some kind of boundaries, and the boundaries will vary from person to person that is there in your life. But most of us may not be thinking too much about boundaries generally, even though we may subconsciously have established certain boundaries with people. But it's it has been scientifically proven through research that having healthy boundaries results in healthier lifestyles because you're honoring yourself, you're taking care of yourself. It's an aspect of self-love, right? It helps emotional well-being. It helps mental well-being, right? Because when people push your boundaries, when they push your limits, it can lead to frustration, anger, resentment, confusion. And you can minimize all these feelings when you are upfront in your relationship and saying, these are what I'm comfortable with. These are things that I'm not comfortable with, right? So establishing boundaries is really very important for us to honor our own self. A loose example would be like if you have a house and you have a backyard and you set up a nice fence around your backyard tall enough so you feel secure within it, right? Then it becomes your own private space. You can keep your bike there, you can keep your gardening tools, you can have a hammock, you can just be you in that space because you know it's your own private space. So having that boundary really helps you be more authentic. And therefore, it's important to have boundaries. Okay. Some boundaries can be rigid boundaries, right? Which sometimes I think energetically it's not very healthy to have very rigid boundaries because you're just viewing a situation as black and white. So it can also result in energetically keeping others at a distance because your boundary is very rigid or seeming to be detached, even with intimate partners, right? You might land up not having many close relationships in that case, or you might avoid close relationship because you have this boundary. Right? So maybe you need to examine if you have very rigid boundaries. Right? But on the other end of the spectrum, one is being very rigid and the other is being very loose, right, or open boundaries. And those things can also affect you, right? Because when you don't have proper boundaries, then what will happen is you might start getting more involved in other people's business. Poking your nose in other people's business because you don't have a boundary, you don't understand boundaries, so you kind of get too involved in other people's drama that is going on. Or you might find it difficult to say no to people, right? And people might end up taking advantage of your kindness, your compassion, and you have difficulty saying no. It could be because of fear of rejection or people pleasing or whatever other behaviors can happen when you have loose boundaries. It can also result in you oversharing too much of your personal information indiscriminately with people, right? Or sharing other people's personal information with anybody else. Part of it is like gossiping, right? Gossiping is when you're talking not with good intentions in your heart about a person. I think in gossiping, you are sharing people's personal life with others. And one of the things that can happen with gossiping is your energy gets filled with holes. It's like you have an energy field around you, right? And that's your actual house, not this physical body. You are an energetic being. And when you're gossiping, you are actually creating holes in your energy field. And through those holes, a lot more negativity can enter into your energy field. So the only person who's affected most by gossiping is not the person you're gossiping about only, but more importantly, you are affected a lot, right? Because the seeds you sow are the seeds that are going to sprout into plants. So the more negativity you spread around, the more negativity you're going to invite into your energy field from outside sources. So that's also encroaching boundaries, because instead of letting the other person talk about their uh, information by themselves, you are the one going around broadcasting their information to everybody else. Right? So again, gossiping is also a way of not honoring boundaries. So when you learn to set boundaries within your own life, it'll be easier for you to honor other people's boundaries too. It'll be easier for you to accept a no from other people and understanding that their boundaries are there. Right? So based on your experience with your life or with your clients' lives, Julie, have you noticed anything about boundaries?
I think you brought up a good point that there's obviously both extremes to our boundaries. Where are you too rigid and your boundary is too stiff and you're not able to, have that play like where you're exploring and trying new things. So there's that aspect. And then I love, of course, the other aspect where you're too open. So there's too little boundaries. So everyone's almost taking advantage of you, or like we talk about, draining your energy. And I love that analogy or metaphor of, this bubble, that your energy bubble that, is you, but then there's holes everywhere. So you're almost like draining yourself or feeling exhausted. And I think a lot of my clients, which are empaths, that's more of the one that they resonate with almost overgiving and feeling like they have to help everyone or be involved in everyone's life, when at the end of the day it's actually too much involvement or too much putting responsibility on yourself to kind of help them out through those things. So I think those are very two aspects to think about. And going back to, the original point that I mentioned, which is understanding where you are in that moment to see how you can better deal with those boundaries. And we talked a lot about this in our last part 2 episode of the self-awareness. And I think that's also included in, in that moment, how are you feeling? What's your energy like? What are you going through? Is it an important issue to tackle? Is it an important thing to deal with? Or is it better to, again, distance yourself and set those boundaries so you can have a little bit more of that separation? But I think it's a huge topic that we talk about with my clients all the time.
Yeah. And that is, I think, one of the things that is affecting everybody, because we don't have good boundaries. And those are based on our religious beliefs or our cultural beliefs, right? Because we haven't learned. So some of the things that types of boundaries that we can talk about today is like a physical boundary. You can have some physical boundaries, which could be even centered around how you want to be treated in public. Could be around sexuality, whether you like being hugged or you don't feel comfortable about it. So you can set up some physical boundaries. And like I said, you can have a boundary which says, when my room is closed, my door is close to my room, then you don't enter my room. Or you can put a do not disturb sign. So that could be a physical boundary that you set up. So you can have some of those boundaries. It's just like when my kids were growing up. I like to hug them, and was a little touchy kind of a mom. But as they started growing and becoming teens, they didn't want displays of affection so much in public, right? So they started putting those boundaries around. So you honor their boundaries because you understand that this is okay, right? Because you understand the importance of boundaries. In relationships, you can set up boundaries with your partner, what you're comfortable with or what you're not comfortable with. And you can have some physical boundaries set up there too, right? So that's one kind of boundary. Second could be a time boundary, right? Where you determine that this is like, especially these days when everybody's working from home, you can have a time boundary that says, when I'm in my workroom or workspace, then I don't want to be disturbed. Just because I'm at home doesn't mean you just disturb me at that time, because I'm still working, right? So you can have, or it could be that you have set up a time to meet with friends one evening, and then suddenly your aunt calls up and says, you know what, can you come over and help me with something? Right? Now, of course, depending on what kind of help it is, if there's emergency or not, you can set up some boundaries and say, you know what, I can't come today because I'm meeting with my friends, but can I come after an hour or 2 hours or maybe tomorrow? right? Because if you don't set that boundary, then you'll end up going helping your aunt, but inside you, you'll be frustrated and angry because you would have rather spent time with your friend, but here you are helping your aunt out, right? So to minimize all those feelings of, anger, frustration that we feel, resentment sometimes because somebody's asking us to do something we don't want to do, right? Why not have clear boundaries? So that could be a example of a time boundary where you set up that this is my time for myself, right? For example, I had that with me when my kids were growing up. Is at a particular time in the night, I would just shut off my family because I needed that hour to myself. Right. So when my children, even though they were young, they understood that at this time my mom is going to enter a room and then we don't disturb her unless it's an emergency. Right. Because I'm working whole day and I'm taking care of them in the day. And then I say, I'm done with all that. And now it's you go to your father if you need something because this is my time to myself. So it doesn't show that I love my kids less. It just shows that I respect and honor myself and I need the time to recharge myself. Right? So you can set up some time boundaries that way too. But it's important because you're teaching your kids also by doing this thing that is important to honor yourself too by example, right? Children learn more from example than from the words that you speak. So you're teaching them that it's okay to take time out for yourself. It's okay to want to do things by yourself. Right? So therefore those boundaries are important. Another kind of boundary I can think about is like conversational boundaries, right? Certain topics one is not comfortable talking about. And you can say, you know what, I don't want to really discuss this topic. Right? So recently I went for a hike and I met a new couple there. And we were just getting to know each other. And then the husband started talking of politics, and the wife immediately told him, let's not talk about it. And because she probably knew her husband gets very passionate when he gets into politics. So she was like, let's not go. So she set up a firm boundary that this is not piece of a conversation that we're going to have. Right? So having those, also you're honoring yourself by saying, don't want to sit around talking of something that I'm not comfortable about. So you can have conversational boundaries with family. Now it's holiday season coming. Families are meeting together. You can have boundaries there. Say, you know what, I don't want you to talk about this aspect of my life during a conversation. Okay, that is my private aspect, and I don't want us to discuss this. So I don't want us to be talking about it. So when you put the boundaries clearly, then the expectations are set correctly, right? And then you can have consequences to set up also. If people get to approach your boundaries, you can have consequences or cross your boundaries, right? Just like we do with kids, we give them time out when they cross the rules, right? And then they say, hey, you can go to your room and sit and reflect on what you did. Right? So that's a consequence for breaking the rule. Similarly, you can have consequences, like maybe if you do this a couple of times that I'm not interacting with you that much anymore, or I'm not coming out with you, whatever you want to do. It's very personal, so I don't have a fixed answer. But I remember a client of mine, when she was getting married, she said she would set up very clear boundaries about finances with her to-be spouse, right? And I thought that was really nice because many of us don't think about that. But it just made things easier because both were working individuals. And she said, we wanted to set up their boundaries and how we're going to handle finances going forward. Right. So I thought that was great because your expectations, the earlier in the relationship you set up a boundary, the better the relationship is. And then later on, when you try to set it up, it takes a little more effort. Right. So if I'm always having loose boundaries, for example, with a family member, and they think they can tell me anything anytime, and they can ask me to do anything anytime, and then suddenly I start enforcing boundaries, they're going to start rebelling against you. Even putting labels on you, saying you're becoming selfish now, you're becoming self-centered. And have you noticed that happening with family
Yeah.
members or anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely even speak from personal experience, being so easygoing and relax and chill. And on one hand, that really does it's nice and it does serve you, but on the other hand, it's almost like, as an empath, people get used to you being this easy flowing, you're gonna do whatever, they want at the moment. And I think eventually when I started taking back my power and saying, actually, I have more decision in this, and if I don't feel, like you said, comfortable doing this, then I maybe take a step back, or I take more time for myself, or I kind of go and do my own thing. It does sort of come off as a surprise because it's something that
Yeah.
used to seeing you as. And I think of the points that you mentioned, one that stood out to me was not having all of this shown in public. Like if you're having an argument, that's been one of my uh, biggest biggest importance in a relationship, for example, is if we're going through some things, don't just like throw me out in the, you know, out on the street in the middle of everyone and talk about our problems. I'm a big believer that if you have something to say, let's talk about it and work it out. But it's not so, you know, setting boundaries when you're just throwing your problem and everyone's problem, you know, at a dinner table or at a party with friends. I think being able to separate those things again and leave distance almost puts more trust in your relationship that you guys
Mhm.
are a team versus you're just, you know, arguing and fighting about different things. And that's a big component of setting boundaries.
Very true. And it also depends on the culture you come from, right? In certain cultures, it's a big no-no to talk about personal problems in public. But in certain cultures, like the culture I came from in Asia and India, it's very common to encroach each other's personal life and, ask questions, personal questions in public also. So I think a lot depends on your culture also. So, and cultural upbringing. But yeah, this is your life and you have a right to live your life the way you want to. And you don't need anybody else telling you how you should be feeling, how you should not be feeling, what should you believe in, what you should not believe in, how your life should run, right? And when that happens, when you don't have clear boundaries, then people actually dictate you, they may intimidate you, and they may use entitlement as a way of getting things done from you. So yeah, respecting yourself and honoring yourself will help you to set clear boundaries. And sometimes it's difficult, right? Especially in certain cultures where we talked about last time also, you have to respect your elders, but then they can encroach, they can use entitlement and encroach on your personal thing, right? And you might have difficulty telling them no. But I think one of the things, a tool you can use is you can either continue to live your life that way and have them all the time pushing your limits, or you can decide to take some action, right? And one of the ways you can start is even by mentally rehearsing as if you're talking to them and they're there, and learning to speak your mind, and you keep rehearsing that over and over again by visualizing in your mind that you're talking till you gain enough confidence that you can do it in person, right? So when you rehearse it over and over again in your mind as if they're standing in front of you, you are expressing your uh, feelings to them and saying, when you say these things to me, it hurts me every time. So I really don't appreciate you talking about this every time. Whatever it is, the situation is, rehearse it. Sometimes that helps, because sometimes it's really difficult when the other person is very strong energy, and very authoritative, then it's difficult to really speak to them directly. So rehearse it. The more you rehearse it, the more you start making your energy feel comfortable talking about it. And then one day you will generate enough energy to stand up and speak your voice.
Yeah, I think the two main things that you mentioned is one, again, it's a whole spectrum, right?
Yeah.
Between setting not enough boundaries and setting too many boundaries, like you were talking about, you know, not sharing your problems with everybody. On one hand, yes, you don't want to share your problems with everybody in public where, you know, it's almost embarrassing and it's something that you could have dealt with internally. But then the other, of course, extreme is you never talk to anyone about your problems, and then all of a sudden now you're just keeping everything inside for yourself.
Yeah. So basically, the more self love you have, the more you learn to love yourself and honor yourself, the more you'll be finding it easier and easier to set boundaries. And it's a journey, right? We are all on the journey, especially with setting boundaries between work and home is becoming so much more blurred nowadays because we are working from home, right? And now we need to really learn. And another aspect that makes setting boundaries difficult is the social media stuff, you know. You just don't know who's going to post what pictures of you and wherever, right? So again, there are challenges with this new world of technology. Sometimes setting boundaries is not that easy, right? The thing is, it's a process, and we keep learning as we keep going forward more and more, right? Like last time, I was talking about accepting yourself just the way you are and knowing what people and situations in your life are not empowering you, and figuring it out how you're going to handle those people and situations going forward, right? One of the ways you do it is by setting boundaries and communicating clearly to those people. Communication is an important part of setting boundaries. You can set boundaries all you like in your mind, but if you don't communicate it through your words or your actions, people are not going to enforce it,
Yeah.
right? But if you can learn to say, okay, this is with friends, for example, you can learn to say, this doesn't work for me, or this works for me, and so you can set clear boundaries with those people whose behaviors are affecting you in some way. Or you can say, what, I don't want my pictures posted by you. If I need to post anything about myself, I will do it. But, just because I'm in your party and you can't just post pictures of me. So you can be very clear about what works for you and what doesn't, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's another important part with social media. I think lots of boundaries get crossed. Yeah. Do you agree to that?
Yeah, and I think another piece that you mentioned also is, the fact that when you are setting boundaries, you have to communicate those, because a lot of times
A lot of times
assume that everyone's just going to know what we want and need, and there isn't that clear communication. So the story that one person is telling themselves is not necessarily the story that you're telling themselves. And a lot of times when people cross our boundaries, it's not necessarily that they're doing it on purpose or they're trying to hurt us. It's just that
mm-hmm.
they don't understand our perspective. And so it's being able to, again, be in a place where you're energetically calm and balanced and grounded, and then take it to the next level of having those discussions, which a lot of people, kind of avoid. But it's the only way to sort of start being on the same page for, I need this, what do you need from me, and make it this back and forth communication versus just like, what's going on? I expected you to give me my space and you're not giving me my space, right? For all you know, they think they are giving you your space, but it's the level that you want. So again, this is the point where communication of one, being aware of what you want and what you need as far as boundaries, and then next level of really communicating that with whoever it needs to be communicated to.
I think that's you brought up a very valid point. I think because of our differences in our belief system, cultural systems, we may think somebody's about negative attitude. That may not be true. They just don't know your boundary, and therefore they're crossing it, right? So it doesn't have to be confrontational every time when somebody crosses a boundary. It's just a matter of communication, as you said, and making them aware that, it doesn't work for me. Especially in this day and age when we are always interacting with so many diverse cultures, right? And everybody has different ways of perceiving the reality. Communication is so key to letting them know, you know what? It's just like when I started, I've been very fortunate. I've traveled to 20 plus countries, and it's been a blessing to be aware of so many cultures. But then you realize that what you take as normal in your reality, suddenly when you're traveling, it's not normal in that other person's world, right? And that opens your eyes up to saying, okay, maybe I have to communicate and say, you know what, this is something that doesn't work for me. You know? So yeah, being exposed to different cultures really helps you to expand, to know that everybody is not out here to get you. And sometimes people think that, oh, this person is crossing my boundary all the time. But that person may not be aware that they're crossing your boundary because you never communicated to them. Right?
Yeah.
And that's happened with me and with my family members and all that,
Yeah.
I was always sensitive and always like
Yeah.
listening to them and listening to their problems all the time. And then when I started setting boundaries, suddenly it's like, they didn't realize that they were offending me by doing this thing over and over again because I never said anything.
Yeah.
Right? And,
Yeah. I mean,
now,
for me, like a good example of that is I was so quiet and I just always stood back, that I just always let people talk over me, and to the point where they just believed that, oh, I was fine just not talking. But internally, it was almost like this fight for why are you not giving me space to express myself and share. And it's only when I was able to say, hey, I actually would like to participate and give my input, can you give me the space, that they started realizing, oh yeah, of course, no problem, right? So it's really
yeah,
taking it from a perspective of not taking it personally. And I talk about this with my clients a lot. It's not about arguing with the other person or starting this confrontation or this fight. It's really just about choosing yourself. And this really relates back to that self-love of, if I'm choosing myself, I will not accept this behavior. Therefore, I should express myself and communicate and better express what it is that I do need in this moment. And again, it's shift that script from I'm not arguing or I'm not trying to prove a point to I'm actually choosing myself. And from choosing myself, I'm going to be able to accomplish this.
very true. Very true. And we talked about this, and sometimes we repeat things that we talk about because repetition is the key to success, right? And I keep bringing that up very often with my clients too, because your conscious mind is looking at things from a very shallow perspective, and you think, oh, I know this already. But really, for any information to really become part of your being, so that it's part of your energy field, you have to keep repeating it over and over again, so that it sinks deeper and deeper and deeper. And then one day, boom, it's part of your energy field, and you just automatically behave in a certain manner because things have shifted for you, right? So another kind of boundary that we're talking about is intellectual boundaries, which is basically based on your thoughts and your belief systems. Respecting your belief systems enough to let somebody know that these are my belief system and this is what I believe in, right? And when you start doing that, you will respect other people's belief systems. Many times I go to places and people are arguing and arguing, trying to make the other person change their belief systems, right? Rather than just respecting. This is how what they believe in, right?
Yeah.
I had that with my kids because I believe in a lot of metaphysical stuff. They don't, right? So I'm learning to tell them that, it's okay for you to live your life without believing in this, but I do believe in metaphysical stuff. And that's my way of living in my life. And that you need to honor that.
Yeah.
I'm not asking you to change your belief systems. I want you to live your life by your own belief systems. But I'm asking you also not to argue about my belief systems because that's mine and I want to live my life by my belief system. Right? So when you clearly communicate to them, then they also learn to respect your belief systems and they don't argue back.
Yeah. And
So
it goes to this big concept of like there's no right or wrong. It's just your perception, how you're reading the story, the situation, your feelings, the emotions attached to it. So it's simple to say there's no right or wrong. It seems like it's basic, but if you really start looking into that, it goes much deeper. And like you said, it's okay for you to have a way of thinking and a way of believing, and it's okay for them to have something different. It's being able to respect the two, and that right there is the boundary.
Yeah, and that makes life so much easier, right? Because when you come together as family or as friends, when you understand the belief systems, the boundaries what your person has set, then you don't encroach it. And then all this negativity that generates, because you get resentment, you get confusion, you get anger when somebody's crossing your boundaries, all that, you can minimize all those feelings, right? By saying, okay, Julie doesn't like to talk about this, so I'm not going to talk about this in her presence.
Yeah.
Right? That's me respecting your boundaries and saying, I don't believe in what she talks, her belief system, but I'm okay with that. Right?
Yeah.
So that's how we can make a better world, all of us, if we can allow each other to live in our own belief system, because ultimately this is my life, right? And I'm allowed to go and have my life in any way I want to.
Yeah.
Each of us is divine, and each of us, there are no two similar fingerprints in this world. Everybody is different. So the more we learn to love ourselves, the more we'll appreciate our uniqueness. And when you learn to appreciate your uniqueness, you understand that it's okay for other person to be unique too and be very different from you, right? So there is so much easier relationships we can develop when we learn to acknowledge that uniqueness is good versus our current school system where we want to put everybody together in one box and everybody should be great students and everybody should get A grade. I think that's not right because every soul is so different. If I came into this world to be a musician, why am I supposed to learn all those other things maybe, right? Geography, and why should I be excelling in all subjects?
Yeah.
Right? And why should I be deemed as a bad student because I'm not doing good in grammar, for example? I've been around the world and people speak same language, English in so many different ways, right? That sometimes, it's like, really, grammar matters so much. Maybe it matters to those people who are following English more in greater depth, but for most people, it's not the grammar that is important, right? So coming to that belief system where I believe that communication is just a way of letting each other know things, and I don't need particular grammar to communicate, then it becomes easier for people, right? It's like, yeah, Karuna, don't forget her grammar, just listen to her words. She's going to make grammatical errors, and that's okay. It's like pronunciation, English is spoken and pronounced in so many different ways around the world. And it's like, why should I pronounce it just one way? It's like when my kids were young and they were in school where there was so much emphasis on pronunciation and grammar, and they would come back and correct me all the time. And I'm like, why? Did you not understand what I meant by this? And how does it matter whether I pronounced it this way or that way? Right? And they say, no, Mom, this is how you should pronounce it. There's a correct way. And I'm like, there is no correct way. It's just communication for me. Right? So again, belief systems. Everybody doesn't have to believe in what I and you are talking over here, right? Because these are our experiences and our lives we are sharing with you. Right? So you have a choice whether you believe in everything that we say or you don't, and we respect that. Right? So, but we would love it if you share your stories too, because then we all learn to grow together. And that's what this whole talk is all about, right? It's not just me pushing our information to you. We want to listen to you also, right?
And you talked about believing, you know, others believing, and I think again back to self-love, it's that component of believing in yourself, and that confidence to know this is who I am, and so therefore I'm setting these boundaries, therefore I'm accepting this, you know, and going deeper in that. So I think potentially our next discussion will be all around that, you know, feeling like what I am is good enough and I have the confidence and I'm really stepping into, yeah, I do believe in myself.
Yeah, believing in yourself is such an important part, because if you start learning to empower yourself, you will set good boundaries. You'll set healthy boundaries, because I love myself so much. I'm not going to allow somebody to disrespect me, right? So I will set clear boundaries. And it's not that I need your approval anymore, because I am defining my life based on what I want to live my life by, right? Versus you telling me how I should behave in the situation. Like, you know, when you're young, your parents tell you how to behave, and that's okay, right? But as you grow up, you need to figure out how you want to live your life. It's not based on your parents or your relatives or your friends who tell you, you know, you can't talk like this,
Yeah.
right? And I'm sure we all have had that experience, right? Because I had to behave in a particular manner around people. It's like many times in India, we have this culture of dressing up well, as they call it, and others around. And I was always had a problem with that, because for me, dressing up well was being comfortable in the clothes I'm wearing, versus wearing clothes that I'm not feeling comfortable in, right? So again, different belief systems. So when I was young, I had to follow what my parents told me to do and wear what they told me to do. But now that I'm grown up, I'm like, you know what? I'm comfortable in cotton clothing more than I'm comfortable in synthetic. So I'm going to start wearing cotton more now, right? Because I just feel comfortable in that clothing, right? So yeah, live your life by your own belief system, set your own boundaries, and don't allow others to tell you who you should be,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Believe in yourself. Make your story, like we talked about in the first session, of who you are. And
Yeah.
there are no mistakes in this world, you know, because everything is a learning thing. And anytime you're learning something new, you're going to make mistakes. That's the normal part of growing up and evolving. So not getting scared of mistakes. Because sometimes we're setting boundaries and we may make a mistake in setting boundaries. That's okay, right? Because you're going to learn from it, right? And you might realize, okay, maybe my boundary was too rigid here. Sometimes you're learning, right? You set up a rigid boundary and then you realize you hurt the other person too much because the boundary was too rigid. Maybe you can learn to be more flexible now with this person, because the boundaries depend on person to person, right?
Yeah.
So again, it's all about learning and growing and evolving, and there are no mistakes. As long as we give up this fear of making mistakes, I think we can evolve at a much faster rate.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah, I agree, and I think with boundaries, especially, it's almost something that we have to test and try, see if we go a little too far or not enough, and figure out what that, you know, sweet spot is. So before we end our call today, Karuna, what can we summarize for our audience to really start working on as far as boundaries?
I think self-awareness, we come back to the same thing. Become aware of where and which people or which situations are affecting you or bothering you, and whether you need to set boundaries there. And start setting boundaries as early as possible in your relationships. So if you're meeting with a new group of friends, for example, set very clear expectations, right? So that way it will help a lot. So the earlier you set the boundaries, the easier it becomes. And a self-reflection is part of it. You need to reflect and see what really affects you,
Yeah,
right? And where you need to set boundaries. So, and you don't have to jump into say, I need to have all my boundaries in place. It's an exploration journey. Set some, see how it works, doesn't work, change, play with it,
yeah,
right? And over time, as you learn to love yourself more and more, you will automatically know which boundaries you need to set up with what. So I'm in a party and I have conversations which are not of, of interest to me, and I have a choice of walking away from
yeah,
that conversation and joining another group in the party. So I don't have to be there just because I feel, it will look bad if I walk away from this conversation. No, you want to honor yourself. You want to honor your time. You want to have fun at the party. You can create a boundary that says, you know what, it's like recently, last 1 year since the pandemic started, people get together and they're all talking about pandemic, right? We have cousins coming together on WhatsApp and group calls and people are talking about it. For me, it's very clear. Hey guys, let's talk about pandemic. Let's set up a time limit. Let's talk for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But after that, let's move to another conversation. And my consequences was, you know what, if you want to continue call dropping, go ahead, call. I'm dropping off the call
yeah,
because I really don't want to talk about talk about the same thing over and over again, right? So I started setting these clear boundaries, and I dropped off many calls many times, and I told them why I'm dropping. I said, you know what, this conversation is not my cup of tea, so I'm dropping off, guys. Enjoy and have fun talking about it, right? So it's like setting boundaries, right? Earlier, I wouldn't do that, because I didn't know how to set boundaries. But as I learned to honor my energy more and more, I learned to say no to places, right?
Yeah.
So setting boundaries is so important. So learn to set boundaries, guys. Honor yourself and start small. Start looking at your relationships and seeing where you need to set boundaries and develop the courage to do it.
Yeah, and we always talk about it's not like an overnight switch. All of
No.
this is going to happen overnight, so each little baby steps that you want to incorporate into your life of playing, testing around, trying new things, is welcomed, and it's how we're going to make the most of our personal development and living the life that we actually want.
True, very true.
Um, I look forward to continuing this discussion on really believing in yourself and that self-confidence, which is the next level.
So next Wednesday at noon Pacific Standard Time again, we will meet and keep your comments going and you're sharing your feedback and your experiences with us.
Yeah, anyone who has watched the previous episodes, drop it in the comments. Drop your questions also in the comments, and we'll make sure to read everyone's and get back to everyone. So thanks, Karuna, for joining me today and celebrating this special day with me. And I'll see you next time.
All right. Bye. Have a great day and a great rest of the week, everybody.
See you.
Bye.